So I wasn't able to get through the next game on my review list this week because, as surprising as it may sound, I have other things to do in this life. However, this provided me with a good opportunity to make the first installment of a series I've been considering for a while now called More Whack Than Nickelback. A show that'll consist of short little episodes going over things both happening and having had happen that are just fucked. The inspiration for this series came from two places. First being the name, obviously, because I thought of it one day and I laughed to myself way harder than I should have. And second is because I really think Nickelback gets way too much hate. I do understand why, of course. In 1994, Kurt Cobain fired the starting shotgun for what would become a mad dash to be the next big thing in rock music. This led to a bunch of bands that at the time were so far below Nirvana stature-wise that all came scrambling to fill that hole that Mr. Cobain had left there. One of these bands was Nickelback, a group from the Canada that originated as a cover band but finally decided to get serious in 1996 when they spent $4,000 to record their first EP called Hesher. Well, actually, they only spent $2,000 on the cost of the recording. The other $2,000 went to shrooms, and I can't really say I blame them. This led to them recording their debut album Curb later that same year, and this eventually led to them getting signed on with Roadrunner Records in 1999. This was followed by their second album, The State, but they didn't really hit it big until their third album, Silver Side Up, the release of which was apparently so offensive that certain groups decided to stage a mid-flight protest the morning of the album's release date, September 11th, 2001. Silver Side Up was a massive success and was the launching point for Nickelback becoming the most successful rock band of the 2000s. The big reason for this was that the lead single, How You Remind Me, which if you've been anywhere near a radio since the day that the world stopped turning, you've heard. Chad Kroeger, the frontman of Nickelback, said he studied and dissected every song he heard on the radio to figure out how to write a hit, and by George, did it work. This, in my opinion, is one of the two big reasons that people have such a strong dislike for Nickelback. Not only is their music designed to be commercially successful, but throughout the 2000s, Nickelback was fucking everywhere. They were all over TV, they wrote songs for movies, they had at least 6 different songs in rotation on every modern rock station in the country, and they were literally inescapable. This came to its peak in 2005 when Nickelback released their 5th studio album and their best work of their career, All the Right Reasons, which I shit you not had 5 singles that were always playing on the radio everywhere. These 5 singles, combined with How You Remind Me and Someday from their 2 previous albums, meant that in a typical hour on the radio, you had to listen to like 7 Nickelback songs. I'm not exaggerating either. Literally everywhere. Of course, this major success meant that bands who played in a similar style to Nickelback also got signed left and right, and some were better than others. The better end of the spectrum would be bands like Shinedown and Stained, early Breaking Benjamin, and personally Puddle of Mudd I think had some great tunes. On the not-so-good end, we got bands like Oleander and Flywheel, 3 Days Grace, and the absolute worst of the worst, Theory of a Dead Man. Don't worry, they'll eventually get their own More Whack Than Nickelback episode. Those fucking hacks. I don't know them personally, so I can't, comment on them as people, but their music fucking sucks. They hack off entire fucking limbs of songs wholesale, and it irritates me to no end. So not only was Nickelback as inescapable as one of those supposed to lose fights you see in them RPGs, but they were the catalyst for the popular rock sound of an entire decade. So even when you weren't being forced to listen to Nickelback, you were almost certainly being forced to listen to something inspired by Nickelback, and the familiarity bred contempt. That, in my mind, is why people shit on Nickelback so much, not really because they're like that bad of a band, That's why I thought the name More Whack Than Nickelback was funny and why I wanted to do this series. Like I said, I couldn't finish my game review for this week, and fortunately, life just went and dropped something in my lap that gives me a perfect jumping off point last night. Getting straight into it, famous internet bullying target Christine Weston Chandler, formerly Christian Weston Chandler, also known as Chris Chan, admitted to raping her 80-year-old dementia-riddled mother. According to her, the mother made the first move, but when you're even saying that sentence grosses me out. When you're that old and your faculties are failing, that's a rape. And to be honest, this is kind of weirding me out somewhat. You might say well, duh, but not just because it happened, but because of who we're talking about here. I mean, we're talking about someone who is severely mentally ill. If you don't know who Chris Chan is, then let me do a little bit of a recap. Chris Chan created a webcomic called Sonichu based on an OC that's a combination of Sonic and Pikachu. This eventually led to him adding himself as a self-insert character who's basically God, and once it was discovered by 4chan, it was all over. As it turns out, it's really easy for dickheads online to convince someone who's that mentally ill to disclose way more information than someone who isn't, and Chris Chan soon became the internet's favorite punching bag. I'm not innocent in this either. I was there, Gandalf 3,000 years ago, haha, good joke. No. I was there back in 2007 when shit really kicked off, and I was right there with everyone else cracking jokes, and it's not something I look back on fondly. I would like to just blame it on the fact that I was a jerk-off teenager, but I can't. Bad behavior is bad behavior, and that guilt is a reminder of why I shouldn't act that way. This, however, is really something else. I'm having a hard time sitting down and articulating how I feel about this. I mean, what do you say to this, man? If you haven't heard the leaked audio of the phone call or whatever it is where he released this information on, it's extremely uncomfortable. Not just because of the subject matter, but because you can tell Christine doesn't think what she did was wrong at all. It's a normal conversation where she describes the interaction like it's just a perfectly regular thing. I mean, listen to this.
I didn't have any idea that Barbara was that Barbara and you had that sort of relationship. I never got any of those vibes. But how did you approach her?
I approached her with care and caution.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a time approach. So I just gave her comfort and talked with her, and we just branched out slow and steady, and then I encouraged her positively, let her make the first move. She wanted to do it. And
she did? Really? She made the first move?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow, Barbara. How did she do it, if you don't mind me asking? What was the first move?
I don't remember exactly. Well, that was her first move, but my approach was... I forgot exactly what terminology and approach I used, but I approached with care and caution.
That's good.
And I was direct and upfront with her for the most part.
That's good. And how did she respond when you approached her? What'd she say?
I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was I think she was partially confused at one point, but then she came around, obviously, with the more approaching than I was doing with her along the way.
Right. So she got into it. How was the first kiss? You kissed her? How did that feel? Having known this woman for your whole life, how did that feel?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was simple lip to lip kiss contact, but yeah, it was actually good and it felt right.
I know we're talking about someone who's extremely mentally unwell, and fortunately the mother has been removed from the home and there is a police investigation underway, but of all things Chris Chan has done, and I believe she was capable of doing, this was never something I expected in the Chris Chan saga. The transition, the spray painting of the game store employees' legs, the vehicular assault, the house fire, like that stuff I can understand. We're not talking about someone who's capable of understanding how to act to no fault of their own, and up until now I've felt bad for Christine. Obviously not when I was acting like a fuckhead on the internet, but since those days ended and the saga continued to get sadder and sadder, I've grown a soft spot for Christine and her unfortunate life. In all honesty, that soft spot still exists in some capacity after this, but it's very limited, and frankly I think that Christine is genuinely capable of harming people without understanding that she's doing so, and that really worries me. While I hope that she doesn't end up in jail for the rest of her life or really any sort of extended time, I think this really does go to show that it's probably time she's institutionalized. This is just my opinion, and I don't mean anything I say to come off as offensive to anyone, but if you're capable of doing that to your own mother, there isn't anyone you probably wouldn't do that to, right? And that's really something that needs to be considered. If found guilty, Christine could face anything from a $1,200 fine and a year in jail to 10 years in Fed. Personally, like I said, I think that Christine's illness and history of aggression should be considered heavily here and should be something more for medical professionals rather than the prison system. I may be wrong, but I doubt Christine could survive 10 years in Fed, and also Virginia taxpayers just shouldn't have to front the bill for her going to prison. I mean, they'd front the bill anyway if she was institutionalized, but at least it wouldn't be as much of a waste, you know? People may disagree with me on that, and I'm sure that there are some people out there who would go as far as pushing for life in prison or the death penalty, and I can understand that a little bit. I mean, 80-year-old woman, it's... I'm sorry, I'm having a very hard time talking about this. I just can't, it's just, you know, the images in your head. I mean, you feel so bad for that poor, you wonder, like, if she really knew what was going on. Even Christine said on the call that there were points where she seemed very confused. The mother seemed very confused. That's intense shit. I am interested to see where things go from here in this case, but for now, that's all I got. I intend to come back when more stuff has happened so we can go over it. But for right now, those are my reasons why Christine Weston Chandler raping her mother is more whacked than Nickelback.
Later, Nick.